Okay, so chapter 11 of Daniel, we were in chapter 10 last week, and I mentioned that chapter 11 is really a continuation of chapter 10. And then chapter 12 is going to be a continuation still. So 10, 11, 12 really run together. And tonight is really a lot of history, okay? A lot of history. And the first few verses we'll look at when we get into this is verses 2 through 4. But I want you guys to think about a couple things as we go through this. First of all, when Daniel is writing this, when he's having this vision, and when he's taking in all of this stuff that we're reading about, it's happening during the time of Cyrus the Great, and that's that fella on the right. That's Cyrus the Great, and then if you look at the picture of the statue on the, okay, it was my right because this is my right. Your left, and then if you look at the statue on your right, you'll see that Cyrus is that same guy. Right there, second down from the top on the left. This guy right here is that guy. Okay, that's the guy that's king when Daniel is seeing this vision. But the history in this chapter, there's a lot of history in this chapter that we're going to go through. And it's very detailed, and it's very clear. And most Bible scholars say that it was written after the fact. But I don't think that that's the case. We have accounts in Jeremiah where some of the same things are taking place. We have Christ. We'll get to these. What are you laughing at? Just kidding. I thought I've messed something up. We have accounts of Jesus referencing Daniel and the things that go on with Daniel, and that gives credence to the things that we're talking about in Daniel. And if you think about it, what Daniel is saying is very impressive. And think about it in terms of the miracles that we read about in the New Testament. I mean, how impressive is Jesus walking on the water? Can you imagine seeing Jesus walking on the water and calming the storm and all that? And we don't seem to have a issue with that happened. You know, the Bible tells us that Jesus walked on the water and he calmed the storms, and the storms calmed down. He asked Peter to come out with him. That happened. Well, when Daniel's writing these things about history, things that haven't happened yet, I don't have any problem understanding that we're talking about in this whole quarter, we're talking about how God is in control of all things, and the fact that he's laying out to us these facts from history that we know are history, but when it was written, it's future, and the fact that they line up, I don't have any, it doesn't cause me any heartburn to believe that. And what about that miracle, the feeding of the fish and the bread? Do we ever doubt that happened? I don't have any doubts that happened. The Bible said that that's what they did. But what was the purpose of miracles? Why did we have miracles in the New Testament anyway? What was the whole point? To confirm the word, right? And also in Deuteronomy, look at this. In Deuteronomy 18, in verses 18 through 22, it says, I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among the brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them, and I will command him, and whoever will not listen to my words, that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require of him. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. Verse 21, and if you say in your heart, how may we know the word that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass, if it's not true, then that's a word that the Lord has not spoken. So if a prophet is somebody who says something, and if that thing that he says comes true, you know it's from God. Also in Jeremiah chapter 28, the prophets who proceeded you and me from ancient times prophesied war, famine, and pestilence against many countries and great kingdoms. As for the prophet who prophesies peace, when the word of that prophet comes to pass, then it will be known that the Lord has truly sent the prophet. And if you were to sum up the book of Daniel In one sentence, Sarah left. I was going to call on her. If you were going to sum up the book of Daniel in one sentence, what would it be? Adam.
Okay, I'll share Erica's first. She wants
Because I think it kind of is. But as we've gone through it, at least for me, I'm hoping that your next one.
that God rules over everything on earth.
Right. All right. Do you think you got it right? God rules in the kingdoms of man, or God is in total control of history even when it looks like he's not. Right? That's summed up in one sentence, but I have two sentences, but they're each one sentence. And they both say the same thing. One has more words than the other, but you get the point, right? That's what I've learned from Daniel, is that God is in control. And as we go through the book from start to finish, we're seeing that that is the case, that God is in control. Let's look at something else. In Daniel chapter 11, verses 2 through 4. Before we read that, I want to say a couple more things. Remember in chapter 10, when he was having the conversation with one of the, a voice in his vision, and the voice said, and he came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days. In Daniel 10 and verse 14. Why? He asked, why? And the answer was, for the vision is 4 days yet to come. You know, he's giving him this vision so he can understand the days that are yet to come. And I want you to think about that as we go through here, because it's confusing, because this is not about China. This is not about Russia. This is not about our current political world exactly. I mean, in the sense that God is in control and he's going to cover all things and ultimately he's the one in charge. It is about those people that I said, but it's actually about these kings that we've been discussing. It's about these 4 different kingdoms, and it's about the coming of Jesus and putting his kingdom in place. That's what it is about, and it's also ties very much into Revelation, and some of the same visions that we read about in Revelation are also talking about these same things. So I know that there's some information out there that might seem confusing, but if you actually get in here and read the context of what it is, and it flows from start to finish from chapter 1 through chapter 12, it's really about these 4 dispensations of time with these different kings that are in there. Any questions or comments? Everybody's afraid now because I made fun of Sarah. Any comments? Okay. Yeah.
One of the things that I feel like the whole deal of that in response is saying, well, okay, I'll either believe and say God is my judge to judge me according to whatever I respond to this situation, either in faithfulness or disbelief. And these instances where it gives all these different kingdoms coming and going and the power that's coming at the end, it seems that all of that is for the benefit of any of the audience to build their faith towards God. And that is something that God is always after, giving us scenarios, if we're going to bring it up to our speed, giving us scenarios where we can build our faith in God.
Yeah, good point. Let's see. So, think about what you had just said and go back in time to Daniel 1. You had Judah. They went into Babylonian captivity. In chapter 2, we had the statue of nations and what will come ultimately, and they were defeated by God. Chapter 4, we had Nebuchadnezzar and how he was humbled. And chapter 5, we had how Belshazzar became humbled. And in chapter 7, we had the 4 beasts and the nations, and they were ultimately defeated by God. You know, each chapter we're seeing these things, and God is the one who is the victor, and God is in control. And it is tying in to what Dave said. It's for our benefit to help build our faith, so we understand that God is in control. Even through the darkest times, we may not see it, but God is in control, and we need to put our trust in His plan and in His power. And that's not just something from Daniel. That's something we need to put in front of us and think about. We need to let God be in charge and put trust in Him that He is in control. And if you still find some of this confusing, I recommend that you get yourself a study Bible. I use an ESV Master Study Bible, and it has a lot of aids in there that help explain some of these things. There's other books out there, I'm sure, but it's not so confusing that you can't figure it out, but if you read just the text itself. But there are aids out there that you can use to help you with some of that, and I used some of that. All right, so Daniel chapter 11, verses 2 through 4. I want to read this. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he is risen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. This is kind of repeat. We've already talked about this in previous classes, but this is a little bit more detail. That's the kingdom of a map. That's this kingdom that we're talking about. And in verse 2, when we were just reading, there was a list of the kings from Persia. And as I mentioned before, Daniel is writing this during the time of Cyrus the Great, and he was a Persian king, so that's around 539 BC. And then there's other kings that come after him. There's Cambyses, and then there was Darius. He tried to capture Athens and Greece, lost at the Battle of Marathon. Then there was Xerxes. He raided Greece. He lost at the naval battle of Salamis. And then Artaxerxes, and he finished in around 424 BC. And that would have been the Persian kings. And in verse 3, then the mighty king shall rise. So several other lesser Persian kings are passed over, and without mention, the prophecy, this mighty king who will bring down the Persian Empire, that's Alexander the Great. He's the one from Greece who comes in and takes out the Persian Empire. And then verse 4, I'm going to go back to that passage. Verse 4, and as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. Remember we talked about how Alexander the Great, after he died, 4 of his generals took over the kingdom, and 2 of them are the ones that we actually care about. Because they're the ones that are up here in the green at the top, this area, the Seleucids, and then the Ptolemies are down here in the Egypt area. And those are the ones that we care about. And why do we care about them? Why do you care about them? You got to have a reason. Because they're fighting over Jerusalem. I mean, see how these 2 kingdoms, or these 2 plots of land are balancing on the linchpin right there of the Holy Land, or God's land, the city of Jerusalem. And they're both trying to get that. okay? And that's the part that, why do we care about that? Because that's where God's people are, and that's who this is being written to. It's also being written to everybody else. Remember, it was written in Aramaic, so other people were able to read this as well. But God's people are interested in this because they're God's people, and it happens to be right there. And it deals with them. It's important to them. And that's why we want to care about these two more than anybody else. All right, and we're only going to pay attention to major events in this. But I want you to see the next chapter, or the next few verses, the next part of what we're going to read, verses 5 through 30. Look at what's happening and look at where it's happening. You know, it's these two kingdoms here. There's two others, but these two are battling each other. And they're having a lot of their battles or their goings back and forth through Jerusalem. And that's what matters. And since, how long did this take place? You know, these battles were taking place for almost 200 years between the two places. All right, this is the family tree of the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And I realize you can't read that, but I just want you to see that it's a lot of names there. And the guy that is really the biggest factor in what we're going to be talking about tonight is this guy. We've talked about him before, but Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And he ruled in about 145 through 141. And he was of the Seleucid clan. The northern, we'll call him the northern clan. And he's the one that really did a whole list of abominations to God's people. But there's some history about why. I mean, he had a choice, right? So the why is really, he's just a big jerk, I'm sure. But there's more to it than that. As we go through tonight, we're going to see some things that have happened throughout history till we get to him, and you'll maybe understand why he did some of the things that he did. Not to excuse him, but just so you can understand his motives and the things that were taking place and why he did some of the things that he did. Any comments or questions about that? All right. So as I said, it's verses 5 through 30. But I want us to, I'll read from that. Verse 5, then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and he shall rule. And I didn't put this on the slide because it's a lot of stuff. All right, so turn in your Bibles to Daniel 11 and verse 5. And then verse 6, after some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, and he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. Verse 7, and from a branch from her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and for some years he shall retain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. You see the map and you read that and you kind of see that there's some going-ons between the north and the south, right? They're fighting over the north and the south. Verse 10, his son shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as the fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, he shall come out and fight against the king of the north. And he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. But this is reading a history book. But imagine it's writing it before it happened. And now we're in the luxury of sitting back and looking and seeing that these things actually happened according to how history played out. And there's a reason for it, right? Because we're understanding how God works. We're understanding that God is in control. And that should give us faith and give us confidence. So Ptolemy, he died. He's one of the kings. He left control to his son, Ptolemy. He was 4 years old. Then Antiochus III, the Great, he took advantage of the instability and he gained control of Israel in the 5th Syrian War. And only Egypt was left to the Ptolemies. And so look at verse 16. And I don't know if I have that. Yeah. So verses 13 through 16 I have up on the board. And I just read you some excerpts from a history book about these things, but they coincide with what goes on in these verses. And only Egypt was left to the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies are that nation down to the Egypt side, the south. And what was left is that glorious land. Look in verse 16. And he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. This guy, Antiochus III, was quote-unquote good, the great. He was better than some of the others that came around. And the Jews or the Israelites were happy at that moment to have him. But things can get worse. In verses 18 through 19, let's go there. Okay, that's the history stuff that I read. I apologize. Sounds like I'm jumping around, but I've been traveling through Texas this week, and I've been on a plane this morning, and I'm tired. Anyway, the information's there. You can see what I just read, and it is important that we try to piece it together. All right. Verses 18 through 19. Let's look at those. And afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them. But a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon them. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. So Antiochus the Great, he got greedy. I'm trying to sum that up. Antiochus the Great, he got greedy and he fought for Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. Eric's been there. And even Greece, and I'm sure he's been there. And then Hannibal teamed up with him, and they went after Carthage. And that, on this map, it doesn't have labels, but hopefully you guys can figure out where we are. This is Italy, right? So this would be the Roman area. This is Greece, and this is Asia Minor, or Turkey now, and this area right here would be the Seleucid army, and this would be Ptolemy, so this is Egypt. And then you have the Promised Land is in this area. But why I want you to see this map is because Antiochus the Great, he got greedy and he fought for Asia, which is this area. But then he teamed up with Hannibal and he went after Carthage. Where is Carthage? Does anybody know? Yeah, what is it called today? Does anybody know that? I didn't. I looked it up. It's Tunisia, and it's this area right here. So if you're looking at Italy and it kicks the boot, the boot's kicking that island of Sicily and it kicks it into Tunisia. That's where it is. And so Antiochus the Great, he goes all the way over here to get some more land. And he teams up with Hannibal, and Hannibal was a warrior from this area, and Carthage, and they were trying to get that land. These kings, that's what they want. They just want more control, more control, more control. But a lot of this campaign had to go through here, okay? So the Promised Land, God's land, is important because it's part of the route that these armies have to take. Well, he was defeated when he tried to take those guys on, he was defeated by a coalition of Rome and Greece, and he was forced to sign a treaty. And he had to surrender most of Europe and Asia Minor, the lands that he was trying to take and took parts of them. And he had to surrender his elephant brigade and his navy. And he had to send 20 hostages to Rome, family members of his family, the royal family. He had to send them to Rome. And then he had to pay a huge annual tribute, 15 years of 15,000 talents. And ChatGPT says that 1,000 talents per year, so for 15 years, 15,000 talents total, that would be $20,900,000 per year. And so you push that out for 15 years, that's $313,500,000 in total that he has to pay for his trying to get what wasn't his, because he got defeated. And the Romans, remember, they're coming next, right? And they're exacting this payment on him. So where are you going to get this kind of money? I mean, he just got defeated, so I imagine that's hard, right? And some of the land that he was going after is not his anymore. So where's he going to get this money? Put your hat on. Think about what bad people do. You know, they don't pull out their own pocketbook and pay. They take it from somebody else, and they pay it. You know, if they're going to have to pay it, they're going to get it from somewhere else. And so he tried to pillage a temple for Zeus to get money, and then he was killed by an uprising of local rebels. Told you, tonight's fun history stuff. These are the things that took place. Look at verse 20. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. And can you tell what I'm doing? I'm reading stuff from the passages in Daniel, and then I'm reading stuff from history books and trying to piece these together, and you can kind of see how it's being played out. So Seleucus IV was the next king. There's a long story about how he sent a fundraiser to raid Jerusalem temple to pay the Roman tribute, and then he was eventually killed. So again, we have this northern kingdom up here, and then the Egypt kingdom down here. And remember, he had fought a battle over here, and then he's going back home, and he goes right through Jerusalem, even the next guy goes right through Jerusalem, and he robs the temple to pay the Roman tribute. And then that guy's killed. So look at Daniel 11, verses 21 through 35. And here we have Antiochus IV, and he reigns between 175 and 164 BC. Remember when this was written many years before, but we're reading about stuff that happens in 175 and 164. So in Daniel 11, verses 21 through 35, in his place, verse 21, in his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among the plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing well. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. That part caught my eye, that he's doing things against the holy covenant. He's taking out his anger on the people of Jerusalem. Verse 29. At that time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help. And many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. This guy we're talking about now, remember before we were talking about the 4 heads or the 4 horns, and one of them got cut off and a bunch of horns came up out of it? He's the little horn. This guy we're talking about, and that was in Daniel 8, verses 9 through 12. He was that little horn, or in verses 23 through 25. And Antiochus IV goal was to restore the glory that his father had the Seleucid Empire. And the best way to restore that glory was to get Egypt. So he was going down and fighting the Ptolemies to get Egypt. This does matter. So in verse 25 that we were just reading, it's talking about Antiochus IV and how he took Egypt. That was his biggest victory yet. And I put that word took in italics because he didn't get it completely. He did take it, and he took some stuff from there, but he didn't have full control over it. And he'll get that later. On his way home, though, he found an insurrection happening in Israel, and he killed a lot of people, and he plundered the temple. And this was the start of the Jewish revolt. But when you go back to the text that we were reading, you hear how it says that these things are going to happen, and then history tells us exactly how it happened. I just think that's so interesting. And then in verse 29, in 168 BC, Antiochus IV went back to Egypt to try and take it once and for all, but the Ptolemies asked Rome for help. And the Roman general Popilius Lanius, so as you're reading that, I'm going to tell you also what happened. Rome sent a letter down to where this had taken place, and they said, you can't do this. Okay, Rome said, they exerted their power, and they said, you can't do this. And that should have been enough. But what this general Popilius Lanius did is he took Antiochus IV and he stood him there in front of all the generals of the people that he just got defeated by. And he drew a circle around him with a stick. And he said, you can either stay here and fight us, or you can go back home. So what do you think you would do? I'd go home. If I was him, that's what he did. There's an artist's depiction of it, but so that Roman general drew a circle around him and said, you can either stay here and fight, or you can go back home. Any comments or questions? Anything?
It's just so cool because when you read history, you see all these things and you read about all these things, and then you read the scripture, you find out way before these things actually happened,
Yeah. I mean, I think it is too. I like history, and so to see history being told before it happens, but then you go back and you read the history and see that it did happen the way it was told, sure does give me confidence when God says he's going to do something. And I need to take heed and believe that what he said is going to happen. But I also need to take heed and understand that when he says he's got it, he's in control, that he is in control. Even though I don't know the ins and outs of everything that's taken place, he is in control.
I don't know how widely spread this word was to read, but I would think at the time, if people were connecting dots with what Daniel had read and what was happening, that they would be seeking out this God for being holy. I got to make sure that whatever I'm doing is in line with what he needs, because he's foretold what is going to happen, and it happens. It's easy to look back in hindsight and think that that's exactly what we have. We have the gospel for us, so we worship that same God. And so I just think for those people at that time, if it was widely available, surely somebody had read it and was fearing God and doing what was right. To apply it to us,
Right.
we should say.
And even though I said this is talking about things that happen in the future for Daniel, at least three of the parts of that statue, or at least two of the parts of that statue happened in his lifetime. And so there is confirmed facts that he would have seen in his own lifetime. So in verses 30 through 31. In this one, it talks about how what he was going to do when you read those things in verses 30 through 31. But here's some breakdown of it. He forbade, on his way back home from Egypt, he had the circle drawn around him. He's going back home. He's embarrassed and he's furious. And when he comes back through Israel, he forbids the Jews to offer their sacrifices. He sets up an altar devoted to Zeus in the temple, God's temple. And he offered swine on it. And there's a date right there. And I'll tell you more about that date in a little bit. And then he encouraged his soldiers to fornicate in the temple. He robbed the temple of everything they had. He didn't allow any circumcising of their sons or observing the Sabbath. Talk about the abominations that are taking place. And those are the things that are going on. And Daniel, verse 31, it's the abomination that makes desolate. So remember in chapter 8, verse 13, these crimes that they were against God. But I want you guys to see this one in Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 through 16. Jesus used this picture to describe what it would be like when Rome came to Jerusalem to destroy the temple. So we have Jesus having a conversation, and he's foretelling that Rome is going to come in and destroy the land and the temple. And he's saying, when you see that happening, remember what happened in Daniel, and then take to the hills and run. So when you see, this is from Matthew 24, verse 15 and 16. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So these things that took place, that are real, that took place with Antiochus IV, even worse things are going to happen when Rome comes in and takes over. And when you see that happening, remember what happened before and then get out. If you're able to get out, then get out. We have just a couple more minutes. That's as far as I wanted to get tonight, because I didn't know if we'd get any further than that. But I've got a little bit more. In Daniel verses 32, Daniel 11 verse 32, it's in green because when I was talking with Ryan about it, he said that's highlighted green in his Bible. Why? Why does he highlight stuff that's green in his Bible? Because it's good, okay? So that's good right there. We've been reading a lot of bad, but this is good. People who know God shall stand firm and take actions. So when these bad things are happening, the people that know their God will stand firm and take action. So here's some stuff from history that where these people took action. There was a priest named Mattathias in Modin, Becky's maiden name, Modin, and Antiochus IV's representative demanded that he offer a sacrifice. This priest named Mattathias demanded that he offer a sacrifice to Zeus to prove his loyalty. Well, that guy killed the representative instead of offering a sacrifice. He killed the rep, and then he and his 5 sons fled to the hills and began to assemble their army. And then Mattathias died, and one of his sons, Judas, led the revolt. And they called him Maccabeus, the Hammerer, which is why this is called the Maccabean Revolt. So these things precipitated a thing where they fought back. So what we read in the green, these people shall know, and does that make sense a little bit? And then in December, on one history says December 25th, they captured Jerusalem and restored the temple. And then every year they celebrate this as Hanukkah. And the Jews at that time won their independence until 105 BC when the Romans took over. So if you know anything about Hanukkah, it kind of coincides with what we celebrate Christmas, but the same time frame. And that's when the Maccabean Revolt happened. If you ever wondered, well, now you know a little bit more about that. Okay, almost done. And this is a reference to the next empire that we've talked about. So the rest of Daniel 11, verses 36 through the first verse of chapter 12, it's not talking about some thing that's confusing. It's talking about the next kingdom that's going to happen. It's talking about Rome. It's talking about that 4th beast, that terrifying beast. Just remember, it's not about conspiracy theories. It's about things that actually took place, things that happened. And then we're left with this record so that we can make sense of it and know that God is in control. All right, that's chapter 11. Next week we'll discuss chapter 12, and I hope you're getting something out of this. Thank you.